In the beginning of Martin's third season, the writers planted seeds for what would eventually become one of the show's most memorable relationships, Pam and Tommy. Now, at first, this really didn't seem like it was gonna be anything too serious, just something to give Pam and Tommy to do while the story was very Martin and Gina centric at this point, with Martin coming off of rebuilding himself after losing the radio and coming back and getting the TV host job. Pam and Tommy's whole relationship felt really natural, and the chemistry was really there for me. I bought into it, and I thought it was kind of this fascinating mashup of characters. And I didn't think Pam and Tommy was going to be a long-term relationship, but then it kind of ended up being that. And they dated in the show's universe for a year or more, so this relationship kept kind of progressing and lingering on in the background through the majority of season 3. But by early season 4, it just stopped. And there wasn't no huge breakup with it either. There wasn't like any kind of dramatic fallout, no big final moment for these characters. The show just kind of slid this under the rug and quietly moved on from it. And the more that I thought about it, the more convinced I became that ending Pam and Tommy was one of the biggest mistakes that Martin ever made. Because when I look back on it now, I see this huge fork in the road with two different versions of the show. And obviously one of those versions never coming into fruition. And honestly, I think the version that we didn't get could have actually been better. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, let's take this back to the beginning of Pam and Tommy's relationship, because a lot of the comedy from that and intrigue from that was the fact that Martin was acting like this love doctor, and he ends up setting up his best friend with his worst enemy.
But Tommy, I tell you what I always tell my public. You need a woman you could trust, a woman who's your friend. Didn't you see my show? Didn't you watch the show?
And the comedy there is them sneaking around, and it doesn't even last that long, legit. Like they end up sleeping together and they get caught immediately the next day. Gina picks up on the energy, and it's not hidden for very long. And to be fair, this is kind of a classic sitcom setup as well. I mean, you've seen this in multiple different shows kind of happen, but I think the writers accidentally stumbled onto something bigger than the original joke, because once that secret was out, and again, it came out pretty fast, the relationship didn't stop being interesting after that. If anything, I thought it was more interesting. At least that's just my opinion. And I honestly think it's because Pam and Tommy kind of made each other's characters matter more, if that makes sense. Before they got together, everybody had their role in the show. Martin and Gina were the main couple. Tommy and Cole were the best friends. Pam was Gina's best friend. Very simple setup and group dynamic, right? And it worked. They used this formula for the majority of the show, obviously, and it was great, so I'm not hating on that at all. But everybody was kind of in their own lane, and when Pam and Tommy got together, they basically branched off and had their own storyline. But with all that being said, it makes you wonder, okay, if this is so good and this has so much untapped potential, then why end the relationship? What would possibly be a reason? And when you look this up, obviously there's no word from the writers or anyone from the show on any specific reason why this relationship was ended. But if I had to think on it and just come up with a couple of theories, maybe there's an argument where this relationship had to end because it was changing the dynamic of the show too much, and maybe that made these writers nervous. Maybe they didn't want to go too far outside of the formula. Maybe they were too lazy to really try to put the effort into writing a secondary couple. Maybe they even thought it was taking away shine from Martin and Gina. I would actually completely disagree with this, because every time the writers actually put the two couples together, the episodes were phenomenal. For example, I would bring up the resort episode where Tommy and Pam end up going on this vacation somewhere, and Martin and Gina also go on a vacation because of Tommy and Pam going on vacation, and they all end up at the same garbage resort called Chilligan's Island, right? And this episode is one of the funniest episodes in the series, man. Easily one of the most memorable ones. And I think that episode alone shows you a lot of the potential between these characters having that couple dynamic, how they can can bounce off of each other. And, you know, even outside of that, with the thought of, is the show's dynamic changing too much? I would completely disagree with that, because if you watch that stretch between season 3 and season 4, nothing really feels that different as far as the way everyone interacts with each other. I think you get Cole kind of gets squeezed out as that fifth wheel type of character at this point. I think you see him kind of do a lot of his own things in this stretch of the show. But other than Cole getting squeezed out just a little bit, because even still, like, he's a part of the group and he's doing things with the group. It's not like he's getting squeezed out completely. But even with him, you know, getting less importance within the group, I think the actual interaction between everyone is still very similar. You know, the way that when they go out to do things or when they hang out at the apartment, whatever it is, nothing really feels that different to me. So it really, you know, I don't buy that would be a reason why the writers would decide to cut the relationship short. And one of the most important aspects, I think, to this is Pam, because for years Pam's character is built around a couple of things. She goes toe to toe with Martin almost every episode, and she can't find a man. This is basically the running joke with her character, right? She's tough, she's intimidating, she's stubborn, she's got standards, but she can't really ever seem to figure it out. But eventually it kind of gets to the point where it's, you know, how many times can you have this Pam character crash and burn? I think in the same way we saw Martin and Gina grow throughout the show, we want to see Pam grow the same way. I want to see her character evolve and overcome and become the ultimate version of herself. I mean, the same thing with everyone, with Tommy, with Cole. Getting that version of Pam would have really changed the way I think the audience saw her in the final episodes. I know everybody knows that Pam was kind of given this soft launch pilot in the last season of Martin, where she would go off to work at talent agency or whatever, and they were trying to kind of create this excitement for a spinoff for Pam, and it never came into fruition. It never actually happened. I want to say there was an intro made for it, but regardless, I think it was because they tried to turn Pam into this solid character at the end of the show rather than having her build into that by this point. And it would have been the perfect time to do it, because you're taking Pam in season 3 and you're letting her develop and grow and change with Tommy going into season 5. And, you know, with that spinoff, I genuinely think Pam and Tommy would have been a great spinoff. I'm so serious, man. I would have been all over that, no question. I think the entire Martin fan base would have been all over that. A few years ago, somebody actually pitched a drama series around Pam and Tommy, and it's because people liked this relationship. People felt this relationship, and it makes me angry thinking about the episode they broke up in. Not officially broke up, but basically they were never together again after this point. In the episode Love TKO in season 4, we see Pam and Tommy making the big leap to move in together, and they've been together for a year at this point, and all of a sudden, now that they're moving in together, they're just now discovering habits about each other that should have been figured out months ago. You know, Tommy shaving his head in the sink, or Pam cracking her back before she goes to bed, or Tommy snoring, or Tommy listening to this record all night long as he sleeps. And this is the thing that was the relationship ending conflict, and I just cannot believe that's the route they chose to take with this, because these aren't shocking discoveries. These are not life-altering issues, man. These are things that most couples will have to figure out before moving in together. You know, most couples have an adjustment period, and you see Tommy and Pam kind of just quit on this thing right away after, you know, the first night, basically.
I'll tell you what, babe, I'll tell you what. Why don't we go back to being friends again? Whatever happens naturally. Y'all gonna see other people?
No.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't feel right to me, because Pam and Tommy, they're just not characters who give up easy. These are characters that are very deep and layered, in my opinion. You know, in a time like this, they would be compromising and trying to understand each other, especially for a couple that has been together for so long. This is just not the straw that would break the camel's back. You know, they hit one relationship hurdle and immediately decide to shut it down. And, you know, you're just sitting there like, really? Like, that's it? There's there's nothing particularly heartbreaking here. Like, neither one of them actually hurt each other in any way, and they just decide like, hey, one night of moving in together, they're ready to throw it out the window. We just see the relationship evaporate right in front of our eyes. And every time I watch this episode, I keep coming back to that exact same thought, that this does not feel like Pam and Tommy making this decision. And the relationship is over because the writers in the series needed it to be over. And maybe this is where you guys might be thinking that I'm losing my mind here, but hear me out on this one, because let's say Pam and Tommy stay together. Martin and Gina get married. If you guys remember, there's a pregnancy scare between Martin and Gina during the series. Imagine if Gina actually was pregnant in that moment and she actually does have that baby. Now you've got two couples in completely different stages of life. You got Martin trying to figure out fatherhood. Tommy's looking over at Martin and trying to help him out, but also contemplating is he ready to take that step? You got Pam wondering when Tommy's gonna want to get married, or when is he gonna propose, type of thing. And you see different dynamics where Martin and Gina might give relationship advice. Even though their relationship is a little bit chaotic at times, they're still a lot farther along that road than Pam and Tommy would be. Then eventually Martin and Gina move away like they do in the original ending, and their story kind of feels complete. And you'd have Pam and Tommy left in Detroit, still kind of trying to figure their stuff out, navigating adulthood and building their life together. And that feels like a great segue into a spinoff to me. When people talk about Martin's biggest mistake, they usually point to the final seasons with the behind the scene issues, and where Martin and Gina kind of barely shared scenes. Obviously there was no avoiding that, but honestly I think the biggest missed opportunity happened here in this breakup, because every time I watch Pam and Tommy's relationship, I can see where this thing could have gone. They really had something here, something bigger than they ever realized, and before they ever got the chance to fully explore that, I think they just walked away from it for whatever reason. I don't know. Unfortunately, we never got a satisfying ending to that chapter, and overall, this is the storyline that Martin completely gave up on.